Good day everyone and to our Professor Sir Vach Natanyo. Today we're going to discuss to you about the Don Quixote by Miguel Cervantes. Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra, 1547 to 1616. Cervantes is considered one of the greatest writers of all time. Often, Cervantes is compared to Shakespeare. Both men have become national literary treasures, glowing during golden age of literature. Miguel de Cervantes. Cervantes was born in 1547 in the town of Alcalá de Henares. He became a soldier in Italy in 1570 and lost the use of his left hand in the Battle of Lepanto in 1571. His major work, Don Quixote, considered to be the first modern novel, is a classic of Western literature and is regarded among the best works of fiction ever written. Attempting to sail back to Spain in 1575, he is captured by Algerian pirates, attempted to escape 3 times and was finally ransomed. Returning to Spain was not the end of his troubles. He was not initially successful in his writing and was twice jailed for theft and falsifying bookkeeping records. He finally began to achieve success around 1606. He was already by then almost 60 years old. This success continued to his death on April 23, 1616, which is the same day that William Shakespeare died. Next is the main character of the story. First, Alonso Quixano, a 50-year-old hidalgo, the lowest level of gentry of La Mancha in rural Spain. He has long since given up running a modest estate and has begun selling off some of his property in order to buy books. These books all relate to chivalry, a subject that is about to drive Quixano over the edge of reason, where he will take on the name of Don Quixote de la Mancha. A spine train and hack horse Rocinante become his steed. Sancho Panza and a local laborer who is enlisted to serve the newly dubbed knight, lured principally by the promise of his own island to govern. His primary means of transportation is an ordinary mule. Donkey. Sancho's donkey. Whether or not Dapple is kidnapped by Jeans de Pasamonte remains a point of contention. Teresa Panza's wife, who runs the household and cares for the couple's 2 children, while Sancho is off in his chivalric pursuits with Quixote. Aldonza Lorenza, a young country girl who barely knows Don Quixote, she nevertheless becomes the newly dubbed knight's womanly ideal. Samson Carrasco, a young student from Quixote's village. He believes that by providing Quixote with adventures, he will make the knight tire of chivalric pursuits. Carrasco is a key character. He appears in many guises, especially as knight-at-arms, and finally is the cause of Quixote's return home. John Haldudo, the rich. The rich man who in Quixote's first knightly adventure is castigated by Quixote for beating his servant boy. Antonia, Quixote's loving niece, who is conflicted by her desire to keep her uncle safely at home and her wish for the old gentleman to enjoy himself at his new free occupation. Dorothy, the Princess Micomicona, a woman who has been deceived by a man, Don Fernando, who promised to marry her but married Lucinda instead. Disgraced, Dorothy leaves her village disguised in men's clothing. She conspires with Cardenio to hunt down Don Fernando, and she also helps the priest and barber bring Don Quixote home. She pretends to be the Princess Micomicona, winning Quixote's promise to slay a giant so that she might regain her kingdom. With the prince's help, the priest is able to get Quixote under his control. Next is the minor character of the story. First, Tristan, the sage enchanter, who figures as Quixote's arch-nemesis. Quixote accuses Tristan of stealing his library and robbing him of a victory by transforming giants into windmills, just as Quixote was on the verge of victory against them. Cid Hamet Benecoli, the Arab's translator of Don Quixote, appearing as a satiric character, is constantly being accused of dishonesty by Cervantes, the notorious aside. Don Fernando betrays his friend Cardenio by marrying Cardenio's lover Lucinda. Don Fernando has also taken Dorothy's virginity, only to break his promise to marry her. Gins de Pasamonte, one of the most violently ungrateful of the galley slaves, he steals Panza's mule, Gaffol, in the Sierra Morena. Maritones, a nearly blind hunchback woman who worked at innkeeper number 2. Marcella, a beautiful young shepherd who comes from a wealthy family. She refuses to be married or courted and lives in the wild, hoping to avoid the advances of men. Cardenio, the rag knight of the sorry countenance, a young man whose heart is broken when his lover Lucinda marries Don Fernando. He and Dorothy apprehend Don Fernando at the inn. Late in Book 1, Cardenio ends up with Lucinda in the end. Lucinda, the woman Cardenio hoped to marry, she instead marries Cardenio's friend, Don Fernando, who is the son of a duke. Lucinda marries Don Fernando to appease her parents, but she truly loves Cardenio. Lucinda and Cardenio are reunited late in Book 1. The Duke and the Duchess, Affair of Decadent, high-ranking nobles who become amused by Quixote and Panza, orchestrating lavish and complex pranks as a source of amusement. They are frequent causes of pain and humiliation for the fair from La Mancha. The Canon, a religious figure who once tried his hand at writing a tale of chivalry, though he now condemns his literary art form. After discussing literary with Quixote, the Canon marvels at the night easy ramblings between lucid intellectualism and ridiculous foolishness. Galley slaves, a chain gang of violent criminals, are on their way to being executed. Quixote sees them as helpless victims and helps them escape. When Don Quixote suggests that the galley slaves present themselves to Dulcinea, the criminals beat the knight merciless and then escape in different directions. Holy Brotherhood Officer Number 1, he hears the fight between the carrier Maritones. Innkeeper Number 2, Sancho and Don Quixote, he surveys the scene and initially suspects that Don Quixote has died from his injuries. Holy Brotherhood Officer Number 2, an officer who intends to arrest Quixote for setting at liberty group of galley slaves. The priest dissuades the officer on account of Quixote's insanity. Innkeeper number 1. The innkeeper performs a ceremony to Knight Quixote. He also advises the knight to return home for money and clean shirts to carry on the road. Innkeeper number 2. An innkeeper whom Quixote patronized in chapter 16 and again in chapter 32. Quixote believes that he is a castle and that innkeeper number 2 is the lord of the castle. Innkeeper number 2's daughter, a beautiful young woman whom Quixote takes for a princess. At length, he convinces himself that she is romantically interested in him. The barber, another friend interested in Quixote's well-being. The priest, a good friend of Quixote, who tries to be supportive, but who also engage in plans with other friends of Quixote, notably the barber, to bring Quixote to his senses. El ingenioso hidalgo Don Quixote de la Mancha. This is the title of the first edition of Part 1 of Don Quixote, published in 1605, now part of the collection of Spain's National Library, the Biblioteca Nacional de España. This is the statues of Don Quixote, a bronze statues of Don Quixote and Sancho Panza at the Plaza de España in Madrid.
Alonso Quixano is an older gentleman who lived in La Mancha, in the Spanish countryside with his niece named Antonia and a cranky housemaid. Quixano most prized possession are his book. From his readings and studies, he became by the degrees and interested and obsessed with the codes, deeds, and the tales of chivalry. Chivalry is a novel or a knight. As his appetite for the lore of chivalry increased, Quixano began selling of a crest or a land area of his farmlands, using the funds to buy more books. From little sleep and too much reading, his brain dried up and he lost his wits. He lost his sanity or his right mind. To turn his passion knight-errant and travel to the world with horse and armor in search of adventures with the purpose of readdressing all manners of wrongs. Into action by his passion for the chivalry code, outfitting himself with some old rusty armor, Quixano enlists his purblind hack horse to go forth in search for knightly adventures, hopeful of finding a proper noble to dub him to be a lord of a manor. Now, Quixano, as a knight, called himself as Don Quixote de la Mancha, the tired hack, and dry horse became elevated to Rocinante. After 3 days on the road, Quixote encounters a group of traveling salesmen whom he attacks after they refuse to acknowledge Dulcinea's great beauty. He is badly beaten by the servant of the salesman and forced to accept the help of a neighbor who brings him home on the back of a donkey. While he is recovering, the niece and the housekeeper deliberate with Don Quixote's friends, the priest and a barber, and they decided to burn all his books on chivalry in an attempt to persuade him to give up his imparable quest. But this only fuels Quixote's determination. Having found a squire, a peasant named Sancho Panza, a squire is an acting nobleman as an attendant to a knight. Having found a squire, a peasant named Sancho Panza, a plump, simple-minded but opportunistic laborer, to serve as his page by playing on his ambition. Don Quixote promises Sancho his own land to govern. for surely such a splendid knight as is sure to become will soon.
There is a peaceful and pastoral interlude when Quixote joins the Goaterheads, who mourn the death of their friend Chrysostom, a poet who died of a broken heart. Continuing on the road with Sancho, Quixote has a run-in with some horse breeders, and he is beaten so badly that Sancho has to quickly get the knight to an inn. Quixote perceives the inn to be an castle yet again. Quixote believes the innkeeper's daughter to be a beautiful princess who has promised to come to his bed during the night. Later that night, Quixote ends up caressing Maritornes, the half-blind hatchback servant girl. Her lover, a mule carrier, is enraged, and the carrier beats Quixote when he realizes that his lover, Maritornes, is struggling to get away from Quixote. In the darkness, a brawl ensues, including Sancho, Maritornes, and the innkeeper, the mule carrier, and Quixote, who quickly passes out. An officer of the Holy Brotherhood enters the room, having heard the commotion and the fear that Quixote is dead. Quixote is not dead. When he revives, he asks for some ingredients so that he might be prepared for himself the two balsam of Fabras. He prepares the balsam, vomits, passes out, and wakes up, feeling better. Sancho drinks the balsam and nearly dies. The next day, knight and squire leave the inn without paying. Quixote believes it to be an enchanted castle, and he is offended by the suggestion that he should pay. Sancho does not escape as easily as Quixote does. Instead, the squire is tossed in blanket and his bags are stolen. In an act of violence, Quixote murders some sheep, loses some teeth, steals a barber's basin, and sets free a chain of galley slaves who repair the knife's kindness with bruise.
And now, let's proceed to the last part of the summary of Don Quixote. Quixote befriends Cardenio, the rag knight of the sorry countenance, who mourns the fact that his true love, Lucinda, has married another man, Don Fernando. Cardenio has gone mad with grief, running half-naked through the hills of Sierra Morena. Quixote imitates Cardenio, pining for his beloved lady, Dulcinea del Toboso. Quixote sends Sancho with a letter to deliver to Dulcinea, but instead, Sancho finds the barber and priest and leads them to Quixote. In the course of the story, Don Quixote and Sancho have many fanciful and sometimes dangerous adventures. It becomes clear that Don Quixote is driven entirely by fantasy, since he claims that he does everything for Dulcinea, even though she is never seen in the story and does not really exist. There are some who try to cure Don Quixote's obsession and devise schemes to get him home, but the story have very strong hold for him. Finally, Don Quixote battles a man who calls himself the Knight of the White Moon. The knight goads him to fight by saying that his own lady is more beautiful than Dulcinea. But if the knight wins, Don Quixote will have to go back and stop adventuring for at least a year. Don Quixote accepts the challenge, but is easily defeated by the knight and has no choice now but to keep to his words and go back home. His days, adventuring and being a chivalrous hero, have come to an end. Don Quixote, feeling increasingly weak and tired after the long adventure, finally returned home with Sancho, and soon he is very ill with what some think is a broken heart from the defeats he suffered while adventuring. Don Quixote then stated that he regrets the fantasy life he has led and it's all a waste of time. He has Sancho to forgive him for leading him on such a pointless escapade, and then Don Quixote is dead. Yet, after his death, several villages compete to be known as Don Quixote's hometown and seem rather proud to have been associated with perhaps the greatest fantasy adventurer of all time.
On the equality of all human beings. In the story, Don Quixote rides a horse and Sancho Panza rides a donkey, which means donkeys are for lower classes and horses are for middle and upper classes. People who don't use transportation, it's either very poor. Peasant and the middle class came across as much kinder and more giving than the upper class, which actually has the means to help others. Yan. And throughout the novel, Cervantes makes the point that the low and weak are just as worthy as the high and the mighty. It wasn't just how you acted that determine your value or who you are. Yan. The best man is honorable. The most desirable women are virtues. Yan. And in this story, he notes that death ultimately renders everyone equal on the balance scale. This observation occurs in the scene when Quixote, who has just encountered traveling actors, he comments on how actors are like people who assume regal and imposing roles in their lives only to be reduced to ordinaries when they die. It says na it represents them as they are, reliable representation of complete self. They scheme, they fail, they fall, and they die.
Equality of all human life in Don Quixote. The equality is shown when Don Quixote tried to fight the wicked in their town to free the people who are helpless. But all of this is just his own fantasy or dream or imagination of himself. So first is when Don Quixote sets out with Sancho Panza. Sancho Panza is his friend. Sancho Panza is too dumb to understand the things that he says of Don Quixote from him. So all of things that Don Quixote said to Sancho Panza, he believes all of this, of all of the fantasies of Don Quixote. So on the life of chivalric adventure in the world, where is no longer governed by people that feels the woman needs help from men is valued. The praise attempts to bring Don Quixote home and cure his madness. The second part is when Don Quixote continues his adventure with Sancho and Samson Carrasco, and the first conspired to bring Don Quixote home by vanishing him. So the story showed the people are all capable of what they doing. doing great things, and also they are responsible for their own choices in life. So we can see here the equality of all human life by Don Quixote fulfilling his dream of his own and making his own path in her life, and he chose to have a adventurous life to make his dream to reality and make it reality. So, and in the story, it's shown that every characters in Don Quixote are shown as equal by doing their choice, and show the essence of human nature as a pose a good example of a person who do his things to help others. Don Quixote, he is a person who reads too much about books of fantasy, and because of that, he thinks that fantasy can bring to his reality. So first of all, Don Quixote is very obsessed in the books that full of fantasies and imagination and ambition to be a knight that serve the people. He thinks that he can make his fantasy in the real life and make it to reality. So all of that, he thinks that he can make it in her own, and because of that, he grab his armor, old sword, and his friend, friend that want to come with him or join his adventure. So for me, it we can say that it is equality of all human life, because Don Quixote make his own decision in her life that he can fulfill it, and all of these dreams or fantasies he can bring in the reality. So by starting his adventure with his friend, he already fulfilled his dream, and by that we can see the equality that every characters can do their wants or their dreams in their own.